So, welcome to my stream, Driftwise. This evening we're talking about strong language. Whether I should be thinking of getting my stream, putting it behind an age wall, because every now and then I might slip and use some strong language. That's what they call it, strong language. They call it strong language in things like the introduction to Game of Thrones. This program contains strong language and violence. And you go, well, okay. If we're going to call it strong language, for starters, we're just going to encourage people to use it, aren't we? Because people don't want to be using weak language, do they? So, I'm not even sure it should be called strong language. I certainly don't call it strong language when I'm talking to kids at school about their language. When I hear them use it. Should we be calling it strong language? This kind of encourages people to use it. Kind of says that there's something good about using it, right? It's a very positive way of referring to it. I'm not sure that's what we should be doing. I think that we should be, for example, in the golf, when the golfers hit a rubbish shot and you hear them swearing in the camera, and the commentators say, well, I apologize for them using that strong language there. And, you know, seriously, if we give it a different name, people will stop using it or use it less. You know, if Rory McIlroy hits a crap shot and he swears to himself, the commentator should say, apologies there if you heard any childish language. Emotions get a bit high. Because that's really what most of it is. It's childish, and I'm going to explain why. So, here's my thinking. Strong language should not be called strong language. And the reason is because it's not very good language. It's not strong language, it's quite weak language. The reason I think most people use it is because in the height of an emotion, they don't know what words to use, so that's what comes out. You know, human beings are, you know, we're just animals like everybody else. If you stand on the dog's foot, you get a yelp, right? That's her strong language. Isn't that Trixie? Where's Trixie? So the dog's strong language is a yelp. The cat's strong language is a screech, if you like. Are we calling this strong language still? So what they do is they make a sound as a kind of a warning to let other people know that they're angry or that they're going to fight if they're in the fight or flight response. And I think that's what happens to humans. So, and because they're not quick enough with the brain to come up with actual proper language, we have a set of words that we use in place of a yelp or in place of a screech. It's my theory. But the other question is what's the tolerance on something like Twitch? I mean, if I get my character destroyed by a Neeker Breaker, I might be a bit upset. So, and if I swear, is it okay once or twice, or should I be limiting? Age limiting my content. Most kids wouldn't watch my content anyway. It's not exciting enough, so it's not really age limited anyway. I don't need to age limit it because people of a certain age aren't going to watch it anyway. This is not me blowing stuff up, right? So the boys aren't going to watch it, and like it's in me to make the kind of content that the girls would watch. I don't know what they'd watch, the younger girls. So I don't think I need an age limiter on my content because... Right, let's get the horse out. I don't think anybody that age would watch it anyway. Right? So that's my thesis. That we use, but especially we use bad language in extreme moments, right? Or strong language, bad language. Use it in extreme moments, right? You hit yourself with a hammer. Hit your thumb with a hammer. You'd be doing very, very well to stop yourself from using what we call childish language, right? Or what I call childish language. You'd be doing very well to stop yourself from using it, right? Hit your thumb with a hammer. things get frustrating, we use it. And we use it because our brain kind of freezes up. It freezes up in that kind of mush in our heads, and we want to yelp, but we're human beings, so we use language instead, and so the yelp is replaced by strong language or childish language. Because it's the first thing that comes into our head. We have this kind of language that comes into our head just to be used in those circumstances, right? So we use it for pain, fight or flight responses, yeah? And I know that there's a lot of people who say, well, hang on a second. Haven't people said that people with really, really good vocabulary and really, really good and high intelligence use strong language? And this is my other thesis. They do. But here's the point. What they do is they use it for shock value. Because, and this would apply to me as well. So if I used strong language deliberately rather than as a response to hitting my thumb with a hammer, I do it for shock value. Okay? And shock value is when it's the last thing people expect me to say. Right? That's the shock value. It's the last thing people would ever expect me to say. And the only way it can be used as shock value is if you hardly ever use it. That's the point, right? Nobody's going to be shocked at me using the C word or the F word or something else if I use it all the time, right? Nobody's going to be shocked. They're just going to say, oh, he's just using the normal language that he always uses. So people who use that language all the time have nowhere to go. They haven't got any shock language to use because they use it all the time, and they're not clever enough to come up with completely new words that are going to shock everybody. I mean, first of all, you have to use words that shock people. So there you go, you see. So if you're using that language all the time, you can't use it for shock value because it's not going to shock anybody, is it? If it's just the way you speak all the time. So you've lost the ability to use the language for shock value. And I think that's where people with extremely good vocabularies and extremely good control over their language can use strong language because they can use it to shock people. But they can only use it to shock people if people aren't expecting it, right? It's the only time it can be used. If people are expecting it, it can't be used for shock value. If you use it all the time, it can't be used for shock value. So, if you're using it all the time, it's useless, right? It has no value. You're just exposing the fact that you haven't got a very good vocabulary, right? You're telling everyone that you don't know how to talk, I think. And okay, I mean, that's fine. Maybe it's not important for some people to talk. That's not for me to judge. But what it does is if I'm looking at someone who's swearing all the time or using bad language all the time, what they're saying to me is that they haven't learned very much in their life. They just have one way of dealing with the world, if you like, and they haven't learned any other strategies. They just haven't grown up. They're using childish language still, even as adults, which I think is, because I'm calling it childish language because what it's doing is replacing yelping, which is what children do when you stand on their foot or whatever. By the Old Man Willow, Old Man River, that old man river, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. Don't plant taters, he don't plant cotton, and them that plants 'em is soon forgotten. But Old Man Willow just keeps rolling along. There you go, Old Man Willow. So yes, anyway, strong language. Here's my summary of all of that. Strong language is this. It's either yelping, which is basically childish. It's just we stick in a word for the yelp instead of yelping, right? So you hit your thumb with a hammer, you yelp, but because we're human beings and we like to speak, we use a word. And it's not going to be a nice word. It's going to be whatever word comes first to our mind. Some people might say fudge. Other people say something else, right? So that's the first way we use strong language. So that's the strong language, or at least the childish language we're talking about, because it's childish, right? You've moved on from yelping, which you do as a baby, to or screaming, to saying a word instead of yelping. That's all you do, really. That's all it is. You're saying a word instead of a yelp. Or maybe even as a whine. So very strong emotional responses that we might get from fight or flight or pain. Those very sort of reptile brain things.
Will you give me a moment of your time, friend?
Those reptile brain type things,
Something?
we use swear words instead of, or what I call childish language, use those instead of.
Could I speak with you a moment?
Don't do all day.
Could I speak with you a moment?
Instead of yelping. That's it. And our brain, you know, when you hit yourself with a hammer, you don't really have much time to think. So most of us just come up with a rude word. Second thing is it can be used for shock value, right? So people with very good vocabulary and very controlled language and maybe high intelligence use strong language for shock value, right? In that case, it's not childish there. That's the only situation in which it's being used in an adult way, in a considered way, in a thoughtful way, in an effective way, because it can only be used for shock value if it's totally unexpected. Totally unexpected. Can only be used for shock value. So that's the only form of that language that has any value in adult communication, right? That's the second way we see strong language being used, or unacceptable language. The third way we see it being used is all the time by people who just have very poor vocabularies, right? Instead of coming up with the right word for the sentence, come on. Instead of coming up with the right word for the sentence, they just use a generic word, which saves them the bother of having to think of new words or having to come up with new words, right? That's the third way it's used. And that's neither childish nor shock value. It's just, I mean, they would never be able to use those words for shock value because they use them all the time, these people. So it's impossible for them to use them for shock value, right? So in my view, that's the three-way strong language, as it's called. I call it childish language. The three ways, so only two of those ways are childish, because number one, you're just replacing a yelp, which is either an animal or a baby, you know. You stand on a baby's foot, it's going to yelp, right? Or scream. So you're just replacing that. That's what happens when you hit your golf ball offline. So if you want to use that kind of language, the only adult way to use it is to not use it at all, except when you want to shock people. That's it. It's the only time it should be used. You hit your thumb with a hammer, you maybe can't help it. That's the thing. Or you hit your ball out of bounds when you're expecting to hit it 2 feet from the pin. That's the only time you can use it. Right? We'll go through that summary again when we get some people to join the stream. Maybe they'll join the stream and give us a chat. So I was going to explain my thesis about what they call strong language in the intro to Game of Thrones, but you know, this program contains strong language and violence, depictions of violence or something. But I don't call it strong language. I think my problem is you shouldn't be calling it strong language, right? Because if you do that, you just encourage people to use it. You're saying it's better than weak language, or it's the opposite of weak language or something, which is not right. It's just, in my view, and when I talk to the kids in school about it, it's childish language in most cases when it's being used. Most uses, I think there are 3 use scenarios for childish language, or for that kind of language. And yes, the 3 use scenarios. 1, it replaces yelping or screaming, right? So if you stand on a cat's tail, you get a yelp or a screech, right? And if a human hits their thumb with a hammer when they're banging in a nail, they want to yelp, but because we're humans, we have to put a word in instead, right? And that's case use number 1. Basically, it's childish language because we're just yelping. But we're so shocked by the event that we just say the first word that comes into our head, which is rather sadly, in most people's cases, this bad language. We want to say something that reflects our pain, right? So we use it. The second use case is people who just haven't learned good vocabulary, right? They just use it willy-nilly. They can't think of the right word, so they just stick in effing or bleeding or whatever it is instead of a proper adjective, right? The Jolly Hunter is a good poem that reflects that. Really, the word jolly is thrown in instead of proper adjectives. And yeah, it doesn't matter which word you use there, jolly or whatever. And the third case scenario is the only use for it that actually is adult. It's when you use it for shock value. And when it's used for shock value, it works only if you never usually use that language. It's only ever used incredibly rarely, so that the people who hear you say it basically are shocked, right? If you say effing and bleeding all the time, right? It's constantly part of your language, then you can't shock people with it. You've destroyed it as useful language. So that's the only adult use for it. As shock language, right? And that's fine. Sometimes we do need to shock people. That's okay. Sometimes you need that language. But most of the time, you don't. And if you use it all the time, you can't shock people with it. So that's the bottom line. That's when we say that there are some educated people who, well, all educated people will use that language. But they'll only use it incredibly rarely in order to shock. Just in time. Deus Ex Machina.
Dong hop along, follow the willow.